A few months ago, I worked with an amazing team called Shadow Hair Studios to create this awesome game called Catastrophe. Within that team, I was in charge of building and 3D modeling the environment. Most of the environment were low poly assets and just had plain colors on it. So today, I took one of those rooms that I made and recreated it to look more realistic and more detailed. Oh, and if you guys want to play this game for yourself, the link to the game will be in the description below. Also, while you're down there, feel free to hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. But anyways, let's get straight into the video. First things first, the floor. I decided to make a hardwood floor just because most living rooms have hardwood floors, and I feel that having a hardwood floor would just bring out the type of realism that I wanted. So I decided to go with a hardwood floor. So I decided to do a low to high poly bake for the floor, just so the low poly can just be a plain, while the high poly can have all the details from the hardwood floor. I did this so it's easier to texture a plane and unwrap a plane instead of texturing and unwrapping millions of individual planks. So I decided to go with this method just so it's easier and the final product won't have a million vertices and polys. After baking and texturing the floor, I went into Unreal Engine to import the floor as well as apply the texture. Next, I decided to work on the walls, so I took a copy of the old version just to use as a blockout for my new version. And to make this room even more realistic, I decided to make a baseboard that runs along the bottom of the wall just to give it that realistic type of look. After 3D modeling the baseboard, I went ahead to work on the actual wall. Using the blockout from earlier, I 3D modeled a new wall, and now I'm just getting rid of any floating vertices that I see lying around and fixing up the topology. Now that that's done, I am now going to unwrap it and get it prepared for the texturing and baking phase. It is now time for the baking and texturing stage. For the bake, it went pretty good. The wall was good, but there were slight issues in the baseboard. In the final product, those issues were not that visible, so I kinda just left them. As for the texture, I wanted to go for a casual type look. Instead of going a solid plain color, I went for beige with some slight details in it, and it turned out pretty good. After the texture was complete, I imported the model into Unreal Engine and I positioned it in the same area as the floor. After I imported the texture maps and applied the texture. Next, I decided to work on the windows and curtains just because I would say they're technically part of the wall. Comment down below if you think otherwise. But same thing as the wall, I duplicated the windows and curtains from the old version and used that as a blockout to 3D model a new version. As you can see, instead of just having a rectangle as a window, I decided to add parts to the window to make it look like it can close and open, just to give it that realistic type of vibe. After I then created a high poly, which then I started to add edge loops to make sure there's not any messed up polys or just curved edges. I then did the same with the curtains, and I actually think I kept the same curtains from the old version, just because the curtains was a kind of a pain to 3D model in the first place. I then added material IDs to the high poly, and then started to unwrap the low poly. After packing the UVs, I then imported it into Substance Painter and started baking in texture. I then imported it into Unreal Engine, positioned it with the wall, and applied the textures. The next day I decided to work on furniture, including the big ones, including the couch, fireplace, cat tree, etc. And I'm thinking of going for more of a stone type fireplace instead of a wooden one, just so it gives off a little more color in the room, so that's what I'm trying to aim for. After working on the fireplace, I then got to work on the other furniture pieces, including the TV, bookshelves, coffee table, and couches. I decided not to do a voiceover and explain each one, just because it's basically the same process for each individual asset. So after the time lapse, I'll show you what the room looks like with all the furniture implemented. So now that the main furniture is completed, the next step is to work on the small assets, including the books on the shelf, the mug on the table, and the cat toys on the ground.